Before we get into this episode, I would like to make a quick disclaimer that all of Society Inspired's interviews and the information we share are 100% for learning experience and to hear the different sides of the various issues we discuss. We never endorse nor support violence, and we are committed to promoting peace. I want to create a safe space for learning and comfortable place for people to be able to start to speak. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 9th episode of Society Inspired. My name is Gemma. I'm 15 years old and a Palestinian American teen. I'm honored to have Angela Rose Myers as our special guest for episode number 9. Would you like to introduce yourself, tell us your story, and also share your preferred pronouns, please?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Rose Myers. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. And I grew up here in the Twin Cities and also in a number of different places. So Twin Cities has always been my home base, but I'm 26 now. And in my 26 years on this earth, I've lived in New York, I've lived in South Carolina, also Beijing, China. So there's a lot, but Minneapolis and the Twin Cities has always been my home base. So after I graduated from college, I went to Barnard College, which is a women's college, and Columbia University in New York. And after then, I came back home to the Twin Cities, and I really just wanted to see how I could make a change. And so I got involved with my local NAACP chapter, and NAACP stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And we are the oldest civil rights organization in the nation, started in 1909. So
Great.
after getting involved in the Minneapolis NAACP, I quickly rose to be the vice president of the branch in 2020 when the murder of George Floyd happened. And then at the end of 2020, I was nominated and elected to be the president of the branch. And as president, I had to navigate taking the branch, into the 2020s during a huge social unrest when Dante Wright was murdered. And so now I am getting my master's degree of human rights at the University of Minnesota, and I'm still working with the NAACP at the state and local level as political action chairs.
Hey, okay, love it, love it. Um, okay, let's just get right into it. Um, can you please explain why racism is still a systemic problem in America, even after there have been so many people fighting and bringing awareness to the issue throughout our country's history?
Yeah. So one of the things I like to think about when I'm thinking about how there continues to exist systemic racism in the US is mainly about how we talk about racism in general, right? So it wasn't until very recently that we really talked about systemic racism. A lot of times people get caught up in the explicit racism. So the explicit instances of social interactions between people that are racist, right? And we can call that out, we can identify that very easily. But for systemic racism, it's harder for people to see. It's harder for people to engage with. It's systemic racism that exists within policing, within our criminal legal system, within our systems of just even government aid, and social welfare, things like that, are rooted in a deep historical context of how these systems were even created. So when we're talking about systemic racism, a lot of times it's not because the law in and of itself says, oh, you have to target Black people for this.
Yeah.
It's not as explicit, so it's harder to find, but you see it in how disproportionately African Americans or people of color are impacted by these policies. And when you get into rates and disproportionality and things like that, you lose a lot of people. You generally you lose a lot of people. You need a policy analysis background. You need to, a real understanding of racial equity and how it impacts policy. And so a lot of this work also has to live within a space of just intense understanding of
100%.
not just the problem of systemic racism, but how do we build out a system that is equitable, racially equitable? And that is a hard thing to do if you don't
Yeah.
have that background already in policy making and policy changing. And so that's why I think a lot of times we still have these systemic problems. We tend to elect people who are nice, who we like, who are like us,
Yeah.
but they might not have that skill set. And unfortunately, that skill set is something that some people learn it in the streets and, just doing this work. And some people actually go to university and get their master's degree in public policy, right? So
Uh,
you have a industry around public policy that is already in and of itself unequal, because you have people who literally are, like me, activists. We learned it. We're looking at the words.
yeah.
We look at the graphs. We learned it, and then you have people who they've studied this, and they paid money to study this, and they
Got
pay
it.
money to also not care.
Got it. Yeah, we see that pattern of the misunderstanding in education a lot through a lot of just social issues in general. Um and I like that you brought up especially the police because I wanted to tap in that a bit in this interview because I was next going to ask you where can we trace Minnesota's police brutality issue back to, because especially Minnesota, it's a crazy issue here in the state.
Yeah. I mean, with the amount of police brutality that we've experienced in the last couple of years, you can only ask, like, is there something in the water? Like, you know, is there something that we're not seeing, that we constantly are missing, that creates and perpetuates the brutality, the constant brutality that we are witness to? And, for me, a lot of my speeches, particularly in 2020, I was thinking about like the history of Minnesota being born out of a genocide, or what we would call now a genocide. The history of Minnesota, basically, Minnesota was a territory of Native American folks, the Dakota, Lakota, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe peoples that
Yeah,
were here. But once Minnesota was declared a state, shortly after, there was something called the Dakota Wars that happened here. And with the Dakota Wars, famously, what people note is the lynching of 38 Dakota men in Mankato, Minnesota. And along with that lynching, there was the burning of towns,
yes.
the removal of Native Americans, and that was all state sanctioned as it being a war, US war on Dakota land. So I think about Minnesota's police brutality now as an extension of the state sanctioned violence
Yeah,
that
I see that.
started the state.
Well, I see that. I see exactly what you're saying and how they correlate together. How do we bring an end to police brutality? That's such a big question, but it's ongoing, and no matter how many protests and voices speak out, nothing seems to change about the topic at all.
Yes. And so, there's a number of ways, I guess, activists and politicians are trying to address how to end police brutality. And, no one has the for sure answer,
Mm,
but some of the arenas I can break down into how people are addressing police brutality is, accountability. And so this is on the outset. There's a belief that if you have accountability for the past actions of police officers, that future officers won't, brutalize folk. They won't feel like they can get away with it.
Yeah.
And then you have police policy. So, things around, you're not supposed to hit someone in the armpit with the baton. You're not supposed to throw someone on the ground and put your knee on their neck. You're not supposed to do these certain holds. So that's a policy that also links with accountability, right? Because if you were to do it, then you would have some type of ramifications. You have recruitment. Some people believe that doesn't really matter because some police officers are just harmful and they do not see people of color as people, right?
Yeah.
And so addressing recruitment and how people become police officers is another arena. And then also you have the police abolition movement. So you can never, their understanding too is, these systems are systemically and historically harmful to people of color, Black people particularly. And honestly, how do you stop police brutality if the police won't stop brutalizing people? Stop the
Yeah.
police, right? You don't, and that's a larger question of a system. So those are some of the arenas seeking to end police brutality, and I work in a lot of them and across a lot of them, and trying to address these issues.
Yeah, it's one of those people look at it as an all or nothing situation, and I feel like it kind of almost can be an all or nothing situation to end the brutality. You said in an interview that people must recenter their humanity and that atonement is necessary for progress. And that statement really struck me. Could you expand more on what we have to do to repair our humanity in society?
Yeah, so this phrase really comes out of more of a restorative justice framework. And in restorative justice, the centering is on, again, the word restore, to really fully get what community and what people, not only victims, but offenders, need to actively contribute and sustain our society. And something that I notice is that um, a lot of times policymakers and folk who are in elected positions or positions of power, they see all of these issues very abstractly. And yes, it can be a very abstract issue, just like how to end police brutality. But what they don't see is that there's real life and death human consequences. And so when I say we must recenter our humanity, what I'm really saying is, like, let's center the people who are impacted by police brutality, people who go to work every day and they pass a cop car, and people who have to live in fear for their people, who can't make ends meet. People, let's recenter our humanity, these people's humanity, as the fact that they have rights, human rights, to be here, to pursue happiness, to live, and to thrive. And the atonement that's necessary for progress, I mean, as in the fact of the historical trauma that particularly Black groups and groups of color have experienced, have set us back. And there needs to be some type of atonement, some type of reparations for for our just society, in order for us to actually be on a stable playing ground so that we can all go forward together. Because you can't progress forward if you're constantly pulling people back, and you're constantly trying to pull people who are back up to where you are.
Yeah.
So it's that type of visual. So that's really what I meant.
Yeah, I remember I watched that interview and I was like writing that down. I was like, oh my gosh, wait, like that's awesome. I need to like ask her about that. Um,
Thank you, because I be saying stuff, and I don't even know sometimes. I'm not sometimes I'm not even cognitively thinking about the words that I'm saying. I just speak
It
with the
happens to
spirit inside
everybody.
me. Yeah, like I
It
just
happens
say
to
stuff
everybody.
and
Yeah.
it works, it makes sense. And usually it makes sense. Usually it's what I mean, and what I mean is what I say. But I'm glad that you're able to write it down and come back and ask me to
No,
expand on it because this seems pretty vague. So thank you.
yeah. Um, with conversations, could you suggest some proactive responses people could use when racism comes up in a conversation? Responses that could open minds rather than like the thought of having to be defensive side on the defensive side.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of those things. So I'm coming from the Minnesota standpoint, right? And I'm gonna just say for those of you all who aren't in Minnesota, who are, listen to Gemma's podcast, um, uncomfortable conversations are really hard to have here. Um,
Mm.
so starting there, okay. If anyone's uncomfortable, they want to shut down the conversation. And I think this actually
Yep.
applies to a lot of different communities and places across the US, but particularly in Minnesota, um, people don't want to be uncomfortable,
For
right?
100%.
They don't want to be uncomfortable. So it starts with actually building up a comfortability in talking about racism, building up a comfortability and just naming, racism when you see it. And it doesn't always have to be in like the most, this is the biggest part of my day, like you have to sometimes, some conversations I will say you need like the mental capacity to have those
Sure.
conversations, right? But just in like conversation normally, and how we address and how we see and how we recognize and name racism and racial disparities or just difference in our society, we become very uncomfortable and we don't have a comfortability in the language around racism,
Yeah.
and how to point it out. And so when we're responses that could open up people's minds, it also means for us just generally to be comfortable with that fight, with
Right.
that, the inherent tension that comes with talking to someone who does not want to talk about race, period. Right.
Got it. Yeah.
There's a natural tension there, and just keep going. And you don't have to resolve the tension, but for you, when you leave that conversation, you have to be comfortable with what you've presented and what you've put
For
forward.
sure.
You might be uncomfortable in the conversation, but once you've left, you must be comfortable with what you said. So that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Can't regret anything, especially in those uncomfortable Minnesotan conversations. um, since you work in the Minneapolis NAACP chapter, I'd like to dive deeper and discuss current goals for the chapter and what can the community do to help with those goals.
Yeah, so we've been dealing with a number of things. We're currently restructuring, but our goals are along the lines of the goals of the NAACP, right? We're fighting for the economic equality of Black folk in America. In Minneapolis, that means addressing the American Rescue Plan funds that are coming to Minneapolis after the uprisings, and making sure that particularly Black businesses and Black entrepreneurs have access to those funds. We're addressing community healing after the uprising through the community healing team. So they do healing circles in George Floyd
Great.
Square and North Minneapolis. And that's also an effort to hear community members on what they need, and getting them connected to resources. Right now, there is a pandemic and there is a financial crisis for many families. And so making sure that particularly Black families have access to the resources that are coming through the American Rescue Plan funds, coming
Got it.
through the city of
Awesome.
Minneapolis. And that's the financial, like economic wealth. We're doing addressing community violence work. We're addressing disparities within the schools with suspension and detention rates with Black students. And then also are addressing the health and wellness of Black folk in Minneapolis. And of course, doing anti-police brutality work. Specifically right now, I'm working on expanding restorative justice practices in the state of Minnesota, and also ending no-knock warrants. So those are just, the highlight level things, touch points of the work that we're doing. For community, I would say the best way is to start where you are, right? What is an issue that you're seeing, impacting your community, and raise it to the NAACP and become a member of the NAACP and help us work on it. So that's what I would recommend. We're a member organization. So we don't have any paid staff, right? All of the work that you see done is because of members who are volunteers. And to become a member, you just have to pay your $30. So it's not like you just show up. You just start showing up. So it's not like you have to do anything special.
Are there any resources you would like my followers and I to read, watch, listen to, sort of thing?
Yes. I'm on Medium. I'm trying to get more Medium followers because they told me if I don't, then I lose my $1 that they send me a month. And so, but it's rough right now. It's called facingtherisingsun.medium.com. And I'm planning on posting more around issues around police brutality, community issues, and frameworks of human rights that activists can use. So you can go there now, and you'll see a little bit of history about Minnesota. Hopefully I'll be posting some more about history of Black Minnesota particularly. So excited about it. And that is where you can find me on. So yeah.
Great. And lastly, where can my followers find you on social media so they can keep up with you?
Yeah, that's the question. You could follow me on Twitter. I think Twitter is the best way to follow me. Twitter, and that's Angela R. Myers, SR. Yeah, that's my Twitter. Yeah.
Okay. That will be linked down below.
Yes.
I always have to mention that because I have people that are like, okay, where is it? I'm like, when they say it too, it's down below. Like, just keep scrolling.
Did you find me, Gemma?
I did.
How?
How did I find you? I think my mom sent your profile to me. Like when I wanted to start my campaign, but I was like, I'm not gonna do this. I think she just sent it to me. She was like, I think you should follow her and like watch what she does. It's really cool. And then I followed you on my campaign and my normal account, and you like accepted me, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I just was like, okay, yeah, she's cool. So I'm happy you're here. I'm very happy you're here.
Well, shout out to Mom. Thanks, Mom.
Yes, love you, Mom. So, okay, well, thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview. Make sure you follow Angela on all her social media platforms, Twitter, that's the one. And check out all the fantastic things she is doing. Make sure to follow our other social media platforms as well so you don't miss out on more interviews. And I hope you enjoyed the 9th episode of Society Inspired, and we will see you another time.